After playing the first Halo for the first time recently and reviewing it in a video you should really watch before this one, I found myself very excited for Halo 2. And then I heard some things about Halo 2, and the excitement was still there, but man, I grew to dread it.
I think I'm gonna kill myself.
Halo 2 has a reputation for being very weird compared to the other games of the franchise, especially with its enemies who are notorious for their tankiness, taking way too much hits to die and way too little hits to kill you. If you've seen my last video, you'll know that I have a fairly low tolerance for frustrating stuff in video games, and Halo Combat Evolved has plenty of frustrating stuff in it, as good as that game is. So that raises the question of, will this bullshit start to be too much for me? How bad is the game really? Me booting up Halo 2 wasn't just bracing for a crash though. I know the game isn't just a dumpster fire. Well, considering everything with its development, maybe a garbage can, but not a dumpster, because this is the game that introduces many of the more iconic parts of Halo's storyline. The Arbiter and Prophets being an especially iconic thing this game gives us. One of my main issues with Halo Combat Evolved was lack of a more personal connection to the Covenant. Halo 2 ramps up the story almost in a way that directly addresses those limitations. So, when I learned of this step up and step down, this game seems genuinely fun to review and an interesting thing to talk about for sure. After playing it, I have opinions. Lots of opinions, in fact, and I can definitely say it is an interesting game. So, me and Linky Luminary here are back to give you our review of Halo 2. One from the perspective of a newcomer, me, and one from the perspective of a veteran.
Halo 2 is an incredible game with rich lore, gameplay, and Easter eggs. At the same time, it's an incredibly rushed game with terrible balancing on higher difficulties and lackluster level design. It has some of the best infantry sections in any Halo game, yet suffers from some of the worst infantry sections in any Halo game. The sandbox is massive and colorful, yet revolves around 3 to 5 of the many weapons available. Despite all this, it manages to steal the spot of my third favorite Halo game. First off, the gameplay. The core of Halo 2's classic Covenant gameplay is quite good, and mainly builds upon what Halo CE created. The iconic energy and ballistic duo are as fun as ever to use, with plasma weapons taking down elite shields and bullets mowing down unshielded targets. The player is limited to 2 weapons, which allows for customization, strategy, and sacrificing weapons for what is ultimately more suited for a situation. Do you want an energy weapon and utility weapon in order to be able to adapt to most situations? You're gonna have to sacrifice power weapons. You want to only use power weapons? You're gonna have low ammo, and you're gonna struggle to find even more as the mission progresses. This creates an interesting minigame where the player must see their weapons as more than just guns. They are tools, and you must choose the right tool for the job. One important thing to note is the overall pace of the game. Unlike Halo CE, which was made to be free flow and open, Halo 2 was influenced by the other shooters of the time. Bungie, the developer of Halo 2, wanted a more tactical approach to gameplay. This led to more of a reliance on cover, less health, precision weapons, and sniper shootouts. While the effort to make it more tactical could have been interesting, there are a few issues. For one, it makes the game force you to essentially just shoot everything from a distance, which makes the game a giant shooting gallery. It also made enemies more accurate, which makes it difficult to dodge their projectiles and sometimes impossible. While it is still good, the gore gameplay often clashes with elements of the game itself. Dual wielding, for example, is pretty bad because you never get to use it in situations where single weapon is better anyways. Map design in Halo 2 is much more linear, which is better or worse depending on the person. Encounters are more predictable, and large-scale shootouts are less common. Corridor segments with less enemies tend to dominate, and exploration is generally kept to a minimum. Many levels consist only of tight corridors, a shame because of how samey the encounters are. Gondola rides, based around slow-moving platforms defending against waves of enemies, are dreadful and plentiful. I greatly miss the old map design of Halo CE, even if it was reused a lot. The reason why I miss it is because even though it was used a lot, the encounters were always fun. In Halo 2, the encounters are not always fun because of the map design.
Just like Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2 starts with an extremely strong opening to contrast our two protagonists, the Arbiter and Master Chief. The Chief is welcomed as a hero by the Marines for the actions of the last game. The Arbiter is shamed and tortured, and branded a heretic for failing to stop Master Chief. Do you remember how I said there wasn't too much of a personal connection to the Covenant in Combat Evolved? This is literally immediately resolved in the beginning of this game. A hero is intercut with footage of a heretic. We feel bad for the Arbiter before we even get to play as him, which serves to both humanize and demonize our main enemy force, as we see the true cruelty of the higher-ups of the force and the true consequences of this cruelty on the scapegoats they choose. Now, this isn't really perfect. We don't really get a look at what day-to-day life is like for the Covenant, and I'm pretty sure we don't in any of the actual games, but that is by no means a necessary thing, and even without it, this is still one of the greatest opening sequences in any video game ever, just like Halo Combat Evolved's opening. I think without this, the Covenant might not even be regarded as one of the most iconic villains in video game history. Anyways, shortly after this, our ship is under attack by Covenant forces, and we get a taste of Halo 2's combat. So, I played about over half of the game in one sitting. Yeah, I beat it in 3 sittings, it's a pretty short game, and I thought I had it mostly figured out. It really wasn't that bad. Nothing even came close to the library segment of Combat Evolved. The main gameplay keeps the skeleton of that game, and bones are quite hard to break on your own. It's great like that game was. Enemies are generally a little harder to beat, took more to kill, but it just feels like an extra challenge rather than frustration. I enjoyed it. In the beginning of the game, you're not given too many new weapons to try out, since they mostly come later, but there is one mechanic that's essentially the hook of this new game: dual wielding. You can hold 2 weapons at once and fire them both at the same time. A massive change to the Halo formula that's not that massive when you realize it. Okay, so dual wielding is fun, but I generally prefer to not be dual wielding while playing the game. Yes, that might sound odd, 2 guns are better than 1, but while dual wielding you can't throw grenades or do melee attacks. That can seriously hamper you in some situations, with heavier enemies or bigger volumes of enemies. It also feels like it removes a lot of precision from your gameplay. It's harder to manage 2 guns, and depending on which you use, it might take up a lot of your peripheral vision. Those weaknesses balance dual wielding, but it also makes it lose some of its allure. Despite this, when it works, dual wielding works. You can essentially make a build of your character as you balance out the strength and weaknesses of your guns. For example, if you have 2 plasma rifles, you can shoot one and then the other as the other recharges, or even shoot both to be really aggressive. With 2 plasma pistols, you can rapid fire one as you charge up the other for a stronger attack, if you're that good at finger multitasking. There's just 2 examples of death added to Halo through this mechanic, and even if it's not the most useful in every situation, it still shakes up the game. So I'm a little mixed on dual wielding, but I'm glad it's a mechanic offered in this game, and if, it were to hypothetically be removed from the series, I would understand the desire for it to come back. Also, I mentioned Halo 2 not having too many new weapons earlier. Well, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Energy Sword, a super iconic weapon from across the Halo series. It makes its playable debut here, and it's super fun. You get to just kind of fling yourself towards an enemy with it, likely kill them in 1 or 2 hits. It's easily one of my favorite weapons in the series now. My number 1 pick is probably the shotgun, by the way, but that's just because shotguns are the best weapon in any shooter games. You know how I mentioned this game to share the same skeleton as Combat Evolved? Well, I think I unfortunately do find it to be skinnier than that game. It just feels like it has a little less spice. There are fewer open spaces where you get to drive vehicles, which was a little disappointing to me. Not many sections I'd call too exciting. Maybe that was just because Combat Evolved was my first experience with the series, and a lot of its usual elements, besides 3, which I barely remember, so they didn't surprise me when they were in Halo 2. But that's still an issue, because it means I was less engaged with it. This is a minor problem, it's literally just that it's slightly not as good as its predecessor, but it is a problem in my opinion. And again, this was just the first 3/4 or so of the game. Like I mentioned before, Halo 2 introduces us to the Prophets, who are the leaders of the Covenant. and thus the main antagonists of the series. The prophets of truth, regret, and mercy. Not only does this directly flesh out the Covenant from a literal standpoint, as their leaders are well defined, it also gives us a concrete goal to work towards in the series, an actual way to beat the Covenant, a fight to be finished. Now, I really respect series that do this. When they have an actual concrete ending plan for the series, it makes stories more interesting. When you actually work towards one goal across games and finally solve it, it's golden, it's great, and it was a cool thing for the Halo series to do with their plot. It makes it a story rather than just a franchise. The other big story addition in Halo 2 is a secondary main protagonist, the Arbiter. A soldier punished for your actions in the first game. You don't actually see him in Halo Combat Evolved, but alright, he was just given a second chance to redeem himself by basically becoming this religious super soldier who's kind of expected to die and become a martyr. Spoiler alert, he does not do that. I've already gone through the reasons he fleshes out the story. I won't go over all that again, but I will say he was a very rad part of this game. I of course knew of the Arbiter before I played Halo 2, but I actually did not know he was playable. So I definitely got a pleasant surprise as I assumed control of him, UI notably purple this time, and thought, oh wait, we're doing this? From a gameplay perspective, the Arbiter doesn't play too differently from Master Chief. He has a mechanic where he can turn invisible for added stealth, but that's only really useful at the start of a combat encounter, and is seldom used, at least by me. I do wish there was more of a differentiating factor gameplay-wise between them, because once the initial shock of playing as a Covenant member wears off, you aren't as excited to jump between Arbiter and Chief, but that's a small point considering the level design of their gameplay sections are already quite different. The Arbiter does fight mostly different enemies too, so yeah, not too grave of a nitpick. He fights the same Covenant members as Master Chief, but with more of an emphasis on Sentinels and the Flood. In fact, Master Chief only fights the Flood in one mission in the entire game. Oh yeah, the Flood, huh? The main weakness I felt with the original Halo. That Flood. Well, to be honest, I think they're improved here. They're not everywhere like they were in CE, and in the combat encounters where you do fight them, there are a few of them, so they're not too overwhelming in a way that makes them irritating to fight. They do feel a little tankier though, a bit of an annoyance, but still fairly manageable. From a narrative standpoint, the Flood is somewhat further fleshed out by the introduction of the Gravemind. Think of it as sort of a hive mind that controls the Flood in a way. It was also a little weird that was Audrey 3 and is able to speak English. It kind of ruins some of the impersonality of the Flood from a narrative standpoint, but it is at least a novel concept. I can't deny how cool a giant talking evil space plant parasite thing is. You remember when I said this game wasn't as annoying as people say? Well, like a guardian angel descended to rain down righteous fury upon my very arguments, the brutes have come down to render that point null. Well, I felt like the Flood was the Achilles heel of Halo Combat Evolved. In Halo 2, it's the tanky, impossible to fucking kill brutes. I remember fighting these initially. It was a long battle. I had to empty out a frankly absurd amount of guns to kill these enemies, and then my heart sank as I realized that wasn't a mini-boss. The brutes are everywhere in later levels, and they suck so bad. They're annoying and are so ever-present that they bring the rest of the game down with them. They're a chore to fight. I find myself repeating many of the criticisms I had of the Flood, but with tankiness just added onto it. Suddenly, I see why people say the game is as frustrating as it is. At least it's only in a quarter or so of the game, not the whole game, but they're so common, it kind of makes up for their absence in the rest of the game. I find the easiest way to deal with brutes is making the dual-wielding mechanic even more obsolete, or with an energy sword. Although even that's pretty risky, as it takes 2 hits to kill them with the sword, and they're quite aggressive at close range. Meaning you have to hit them closely, really quickly back off, and then hope they don't move out of the way so you can't hit them again. And God help you if there's another brute close by. Brutes will also go berserk if there's only one on the battlefield. I find it quite easy to just stick a plasma grenade on them if they try that, or to just run away and take out bits of health, slowly. Honestly, I would rather fight the Sonic the Hedgehogs, aka Hunters, because at least they have an obvious weak point. So, looking at everything I just analyzed, Halo 2 is just as interesting to talk about as I would have thought. It's a great improvement to the formula, but takes a lot of missteps, and has some decisions I consider a little questionable. Suddenly though, if you look at the context of how it was made, yeah, it makes sense. Halo 2 was rushed massively. Development was worse than a dumpster fire, and my heart goes out to any employees who are crunching to bring us this game. As good as games can be, they don't deserve such suffering for their existence. Halo 2 is considered one of the very first AAA games as well. Thing got massively hyped, and it shows how rushed the game is in the final product, considering what a massive dip it takes. It was excusable for Halo Combat Evolved, the start of the IP, but we're a franchise now, and frustrating stuff like Halo 1 Flood or Halo 2 Brutes feels less excusable. Knowing this makes me a little nervous for Halo 3. I played it before, I know it's good, but Halo 3 was hyped up so hard, it almost makes me worry. Worry that pressure will bring the final product down the same way it did to Halo 2. Speaking of that, let's talk about Halo 2's ending, which leads directly into Halo 3.
Most of the original sandbox returns thankfully, except for the assault rifle, which has been succeeded by the SMG. The most notable weapon to debut isn't actually making its first appearance. The energy sword originally debuted in Halo CE, but it was unusable by the player. It's an extremely powerful melee weapon that does devastating damage to any infantry it hits, and lunges forward to do so with impeccable range. The absolute best Halo 2 weapon, it even has many glitches to be exploited, including, but not limited to, literally flying across the map as if you had wings. The next weapon is the battle rifle, the spiritual successor of the pistol. Firing in 3-shot bursts with 36 rounds, the BR is effectively the Halo CE pistol with less damage, but much more accurate. Oh yeah, the pistol. The pistol is now much weaker with less range, damage, and worse availability. However, it can now be dual wielded. Following this is the brand new Covenant Carbine. Similar to the BR, it has higher ammo count and fire rate, but lower damage and accuracy. This weapon is cool, but it suffers from the fact that the enemy uses it as well. These enemies are tedious to fight and deadly accurate. And I'll tell you why that's such a big problem later. The next weapon is the beam rifle. Essentially a remodeled sniper, has a cooldown instead of reloading, and is much more common, but has no reserve ammo. The next, and arguably second best weapon, is the Brute Shot. Acting as the game's rocket launcher, it does devastating damage and high melee damage, but low magazine and reserve ammo. Excellent weapon and very common on later levels where brutes tend to dominate. Last, and unfortunately least, the new Sensible Beam. It's a high damage weapon that consumes a ton of ammo and heats quickly. Useful for killing the Flood mainly, but Sentinels will fall as well. It's quite boring. It's basically just a DPS beam. Dual wielding enriches this on lower difficulties with smaller firearms, as it allows for experimentation with these weapons. Many weapons are explicitly meant to be dual wielded, such as the SMG being the poster child of the mechanic. All the enemies are unique and colorful, and most fun to fight. Elites are strong and agile, the most fun foot soldier. Grunts are weak nuisances with all die with a single satisfying shot to the head. Jackals are support-based units, powerful in a group, powerless alone. These three make up what I like to call the Halo Trio, which are the enemies that are the best difficulty and fun-wise. Other enemies that tend to join are either one-dimensional or unfun, and unfortunately, some have both qualities. Enemies in general are all tougher than CE, with larger health pools and much higher damage output. They are smarter and more accurate as well. This is fine on lower difficulties and to an extent heroic, but issues certainly arise on legendary, as enemies become way too much for even seasoned players to handle. Halo 2 also adds new enemies alongside the main Covenant threat in the Flood. These being the Brutes, which as their name implies, rely less on strategy and more on beating units to a pulp. Drones, bug-like flying creatures that are easy to kill on their own, but show up in giant numbers, rendering them quite the threat. The final, and perhaps most menacing addition, is the incredible Sentinel Enforcer. Sporting giant front shields and huge claws with missiles, these enemies are imposing and challenging. They also wreck vehicles by picking them up and crunching them in their teeth. Just make sure you're not being crunched. These enemies seem cool, right? Well, I gotta say, they mostly just suck. Brutes are boring to fight and have way too much health, with no visual indicators to if they are damaged. Elites at least groan in pain. Brutes will continue just hammering you into the ground. As such, they have little counter besides just shooting him in the head, which is boring and difficult to do when they rush you like a sugar-hyped toddler on the train when you pull out your phone. Drones are just boring. They have very little health and don't do a lot of damage, but their massive numbers just force you to run the cover immediately. Enforcers are cool. They can stay, even though they won't. Flood are less of an issue in this game as well, being more fun to fight as they now act like more conventional enemies. However, I will say it somewhat ruins their charm as beings with no self-preservation, only fixated on killing, but I prefer them more fun than lore accurate. An important thing to note is what the enemies use. Enemies use slow projectiles that can be dodged, although they can occasionally use hit scan. This is such a big deal because Halo enemies are accurate, very accurate, and attack fast. When you can't dodge, the game crawls to a halt and sucks. This main issue comes to bear against sniper jackals and carbine-wielding infantry. This is why sniper jackals are so infamous. Many people will say it's because they insta-kill, but I would wager it's because of the fact that you can't dodge. The game has many other things that are instant kill, such as melee attacks from elites and hunters, as well as sword elites. But the reason why you can usually fight against them is because you know it's coming. They're big, they're loud, and you could dodge. With the sniper jackal, once you're in their sight, you're dead. An important improvement to the gameplay comes in the form of your allies. Whereas in Halo CE, where your marine allies were functionally only distractions, firing in tiny little bursts out of a 60-round rifle and only occasionally throwing grenades, Halo 2 Marines are top-notch. They have significantly better accuracy and damage, higher health values, and the ability to even punch nearby enemies. You can give them better weapons as well. Just make sure you don't give them a rocket launcher. They can sometimes blow you up. They also follow you throughout the level, a massive boon on the longer ones. Marines also have greater variety compared to CE, with female and more black Marines added, as well as a Spanish and Asian Marine. While it doesn't change much, it is a welcome addition in order to make the gameplay more immersive. In CE, an entire fire team could be manned by the same person with the right RNG. Marines also get the much cooler and more powerful ODST variant. ODSTs are badass spec op units, with dark black and blue armor and helmets similar to the Chiefs. They aren't just for show, however. They have slightly higher strength, health, and have different characters, alongside a much more aggressive AI. Oh yeah, you could fight alongside the Covenant too, I guess. Holy shit, you could fight alongside the Covenant now? Yes, when you're playing as the Arbiter, you are frequently teamed alongside elites and grunts. Grunts are actually pretty useful. Grunts are pitiful when fought because we can headshot them, but to other AI, they can do some serious damage if given a heavy weapon or even a basic plasma rifle. Not to mention, grunts love to spam grenades, an excellent supportive habit. Elites are far and away the best allies in the game. They have energy shields, strong melee, they can hold any weapon, and their AI is excellent. Fighting alongside them makes you feel powerful, even against the Flood. This serves a narrative purpose as well. It demonstrates just how disadvantaged the UNSC is against the Covenant. When you play as Chief, you're constantly worrying about Marines. You give them snipers and shotguns, you take out tough enemies to protect them, and you constantly sign relief when they survive a melee hit. But when you have elite allies, you don't worry at all. You know they're probably going to make it out alive. Jackals are also quite a sparse ally, but they almost never survive more than a single encounter, so they're quite weak at that, really, even more so than the grunts, which is very surprising. Vehicle combat is stellar conceptually, and all are fun to use, at least on the lower difficulties. They are now much stronger offensively, and enemy infantry falters easily. Even enemy vehicles fall apart just as quick. Oh wait, vehicles are now made out of paper mache and popsicle sticks. The old invincible Warthog is now capable of being destroyed by vehicle weapons and is one of 2 vehicles that you can use for more than 5 seconds without it being destroyed. The other being a little tank. Every other vehicle is capable of being destroyed with mere gunshots, and ghosts are so weak that you may as well destroy them just by thinking about them. Banshees are so damn weak that even if you think about getting hit, your awesome aircraft suddenly just crumbled into dust. Of course, that means that it's easier to take care of enemy vehicles too, but considering you often face 3 to 4 vehicles at a time alone, at least on the higher difficulties, you generally have to play in a very unintuitive way. Hit and run is the only viable option. This can seriously drag vehicle sections to a halt, which absolutely kills the pacing of the game at times. Thankfully, tank sections are much more common and more fun, considering that the tank has been buffed considerably. Even though vehicles suffered in this game greatly, in my opinion, it laid the groundwork for the excellent vehicle combat of Halo 3, even though that game had its own issues. The soundtrack. Oh baby, this soundtrack is glorious. It's an undisputed masterclass in video game music, with some of the industry's best talents ever working on it, with Marty O'Donnell to some actual rock bands. These rock bands didn't even care about the money. They worked on the game and gave the game songs for free, out of love and just for the These rock bands didn't even care about the money. They worked on this game for free, just for the publicity. All the music fits, even if it's a bit cheesy at times. You have iconic pieces like Unyielding, which is basically the Warthog run theme of the game. It's bombastic and high tempo, with lots of piano and drums. It feels like a righteous assault, spearheaded by the player. But unlike other high-octane tracks that revolve around a lone player, this one has you aided by allies. It's a grand skirmish, but you don't feel like a one-man army. It's hopeful and inspiring, a call to arms for the Covenant defectors. Blow Me Away is a track that was formatted for Halo 2 by Breaking Benjamin, and highly remembered for its incredible yet cheesy appearance near the end of the mission, Grave Mine. As the Great Schism, the separation of the Elites and the Covenant, takes place, the Chief and any surviving Marines with him happen upon a room of finding brutes and elites. The odds are overwhelming and the enemy's ferocious, yet that song shows you as the threat. The lyrics and song makes you feel like a damn god of war, as you eliminate all threats with ease. But not all tracks are badass guitar-fueled battle themes. Tracks like Heavy Paid Price show sorrow, your fellow elite comrades slain in unjust persecution. Heavenly voices and piano create a tone of sadness. This is not showing what happens during war, it shows what happens after. The victors are left only with corpses and the revenge of those left behind. It serves to humanize the elites, which have been the face of a genocide for so long. They aren't just demons meant for slaughtering humans. They are people, beings with motivations and emotion. No longer do they glorify death with honor. They now view it as senseless, and the only thing left to do is mourn and retaliate. Sacred Icon Suite leaves fear in the hearts, with eerie vocals and string instruments leaving you on edge, always expecting, always looking in the corner of your eyes. Combined with the dark lighting it's played in, you wouldn't be forgiven for thinking the game has become a horror game. Because it just has. However, the music isn't always hammering your ears. Many combat segments have no music, making the moments where music does play more impactful. As for game balance and difficulty, I knew I would have to touch on this, but I never wanted to. Halo 2 has dog shit balance. Normal mode is so easy that I barely think when I play. Heroic is boring because I could play every level without dying as long as I hide behind cover and noob combo exclusively. You die way too easily and you don't do nearly enough damage otherwise. Your shields are weaker than the CE and your health is extremely low. Enemies wielding hit scan weapons, namely sniper jackals, are now ridiculously powerful because the AI having essentially aimbot installed. But for the most part, you can beat the game with no or very little deaths. But Legendary is a different beast. Every enemy in the game besides the infection form, has more health than the player. The infection form dies in one shot. Yes, even the lowest grunt has more health than you. Enemy projectiles are much faster, removing the ability to even dodge them. This slows the game to a snail's pace, as you only attack from cover because otherwise you just die. There are also additional enemy reinforcements, which sometimes spawn after you clear the room before a checkpoint loads. Enemy health is also ridiculous. Enemies take frankly disgusting amounts of damage before dying, and shielded enemies can survive even a plasma grenade. Melee attacks of your own are like slapping enemies with a wet noodle, while enemies hit you like my dad after a bottle of Jack Daniels. Hell, even some enemies take less damage from melee too, rendering CQC totally useless. Don't even get me started on the Sniper Jackals. Sniper Jackal's reputation speaks for itself as one of the deadliest enemies in gaming history ever. Brutes are stupidly tanky and just unfun to fight. But hey, all you have to do is headshot them. Elites, on the other hand, probably suck even more because you have to carry a plasma pistol due to their shields. They also have more tactical thinking, so you can't just unload to them as they go into you. You have to actively outsmart them. The difficulty between elites and brutes depends on your skill as well. Early on, you're likely to hate elites because they have shields. Later on, as you get better, you hate brutes because they break the old combat loop and rush you like the crackhead outside McDonald's. But better players start hating elites more because they don't rush you like the crackhead outside McDonald's and have shields. A new addition to the formula is now skulls. Skulls are difficulty modifiers that serve to make the game harder or somewhat easier. Some, like I would have been your daddy, only change what dialogue and characters say. All of these skulls must be found and are once found are turned on until the console is restarted, at least on the original Xbox. They must also be found on Legendary and often have fun surrounding, such as dancing grunts. I like the concept of skulls, but the system of them is quite bad. Not having it just activatable once you find it makes it a pain if you want to just pop one on and play, especially since I find the perfect Halo 2 difficulty locked behind them. On the OG Xbox, I like normal mode with the Anger Skull. On the MCC, I like normal mode with the Tough Luck Skull. Overall, I just wish that Halo 2 had better balancing and more options to deal with annoying enemies. The core gameplay is solid, and the story is exceptional, as detailed by Kirby and Hale's Jotaro, and the gameplay feels more like a medium for a story than a traditional game. At the very least, the seeds that this game sowed would create the masterpiece that is Halo 3. Now, if you excuse me, I'll go cry into my pillow for messing up that sentence. Thank you, and good night, or good afternoon. Whatever good in the time zone you're in. Bye-bye.
Halo 2 ends in an Arbiter segment. You have some boss fight against a dude named Tartarus. It's alright, bosses aren't exactly this series' strong suit from what I can tell, but soon afterwards a cutscene brings us back to Master Chief, and gives us the most iconic line of the whole game, possibly even the whole series. Master Chief is finishing this fight, and suddenly Halo 3 has expectations. The huge end of the series, and the final fight against the Covenant. I am officially excited to replay Halo 3 now. I remember so little from the game too, so it'll be fun to experience it all over again. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks especially to Linky Luminary for doing this with me, and I will see you later.